Hey, how's it going?
Sean, good in yourself. A
Yeah,
little bright here. Hold
fantastic.
on. Going to adjust my
Fantastic.
high-tech lighting. It's a
Good
little
grief,
better.
that's a good mic.
It
You sound so crisp and clear.
it was the best investment I made for the channel. And I'm such an idiot. I didn't want to do it because I thought it was too complicated to use. But once it's plugged in, you
Yeah,
never have to do anything with it.
fantastic. Would you like to introduce yourself then to the viewers who are not familiar with yourself, please?
Well, for those who are not familiar with me, my name is David Frei, not Viva Frei. I once upon a time said politics ruins everything because it does. It hasn't ruined me yet, but I'm a lawyer turned YouTuber, and I just wanted to understand things in this world, and I quickly realized that politics and corruption are seemingly inseparable from the world of law. And I've got a YouTube channel, Viva Frei. We go over everything from uh, impeachment to interesting lawsuits to, I say, linguistic analysis to breaking down the fake news, telling people how they need to read the news, and so on and so forth.
Why did you pick Viva?
It was an absolute random thing. I just said I would go with something like live free. My last name is Freiheit, which means freedom in German. Initially, Viva Frei, it had nothing to do with law. It was just a name for the channel back in 2015. As it became focused on law, everyone's like, change your name because it's confusing. I'm a stubborn kid, and it ended up, working its way in as the Brandon. It worked out well. Viva Frei, live free, and learn.
And according to one of the viewers, you have a cute dog, apparently.
Yeah, he's right. Actually, I will get him when he's nearby. But if I pull my computer off the table, it'll end the interview prematurely.
All right, let's do Jussie Smollett first then, because we have discussed a lot of high-profile cases on this channel, and we've actually never discussed this one. So, would you like to give us the basics, set the table for it?
Well, set the table. This has been 3 years in the making. Jussie Smollett Saga was one of the original stories I started covering in the vlog because I didn't understand how it could, how it could come to be. Jussie Smollett is an American actor. He's black. He's homosexual, which is integral to the story. I don't just identify these traits of people's personalities. He was on a show called Empire. Back in 2019, he claimed to be the victim of a racist and homophobic attack on him at 2 o'clock in the morning during a winter polar vortex in the middle of Chicago when he allegedly went out of his apartment at 2 in the morning to go get eggs at a Walgreen. And when they were closed, he ended up going to a Subway. He alleged that he was attacked by two white males wearing MAGA hats who screamed, "This is MAGA country." And they called him the F word.
Be careful what we say.
And no, don't worry. I know how the rules work. They called
Okay,
him
thanks.
slurs. Allegedly, then beat him up, wrapped a noose around his neck, and poured bleach on him. He goes home with his Subway sandwich. By the way, this is something that one of the cops said was a dead giveaway. Goes home, calls the cops, and when they show up like 40 minutes later, he's still wearing the rope around his neck. Claims to be a victim of a hate crime. The media the next day, for the next few days, goes haywire. You had Kamala Harris, who was not yet VP, proposing legislation in response to this alleged attack. You had celebrities like Steve Harvey, The View, coming out and saying, "This is America. This is what African Americans and gay Americans have to deal with." People started getting a little suspicious. And then they started getting really suspicious because as the details emerged, none of it made any sense. So it went from him filing a hate crime report to the Chicago police investigating him for having filed a false police report. Now, I might get mixed up on some of the details, but eventually he gets basically charged, but they drop all the charges under Kim Foxx, who was the district attorney or whatever the name is at the time. She just suddenly drops all the charges. And I said, I don't understand how this happens. So I started doing vlogs to explain how they dropped the charges. It was something called the Deferred Prosecution Agreement, which is even if he committed a crime, first-time offender, non-violent crime, the prosecutor can decide to go with a let's say non-judicial resolution to the dispute so he doesn't have a criminal record stain on his whatever. Turns out that dropping the charges itself might have been a little bit corrupt as well. Jussie Smollett goes on a publicity spree to say that he's innocent. It was in fact a hate crime. Pisses off the Chicago Police Department in doing it. He ends up getting sued civilly by the Chicago Police Department for the costs of the investigation. Keeps yabbering his mouth. A special prosecutor gets appointed. There's the dog. Presses charges. He gets re-indicted. He tries to argue double jeopardy. He tries to argue malicious prosecution. All of those claims are dismissed. He ends up going to trial. Conviction on 5 of the 6 charges, and the 5 of the 6 charges were filing a false police report, perjury, lying under things like that. And apparently, according to some of the jury members, the only reason they didn't find him guilty on the 6th charge, which was claiming to have been the victim of battery, was because they wanted to give him a break, whatever. So conviction. After the conviction, BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, comes out and issues a formal statement that they believe Jussie, don't believe any police officers, and that this is, you had people coming out and saying that this trial was white supremacy on trial in America. But that's the nutshell of the story. Conviction. Now we're waiting sentencing, and he's promised to appeal the decision through his lawyers. But it was quintessential example of how people have knee-jerk reactions to stories that fit their narratives that they want to believe, and they suspend all forms of critical thinking in terms of assessing the story. And when the truth comes out, people just double down because they cannot admit that they were duped.
How did it not become double jeopardy then?
So the issue was that Jeopardy had, and this is my understanding, I'm not an American lawyer, but I've made sense of it to myself. Jeopardy never attached because they dropped the charges before they impaneled the jury, and they dropped the charges before, legally speaking, Jeopardy attached to the charges against him. Is the simplified, under my understanding of how double jeopardy didn't actually attach. He was never pursued where he had any jeopardy, which is how they referred to it. And so it's by virtue of the fact that it got dismissed before jeopardy attached that he was never placed in it, so that it was never double jeopardy to begin with. And he argued that, judge dismissed it. He argued, if you can believe it, malicious prosecution, which they also dismissed. He tried everything under the sun to get out of it. And had he just apologized at the time and assumed responsibility, I think it would have all gone away. But he went around basically claiming that the Chicago Police Department were liars. And, I don't live in Chicago, but I know the reputation. You don't want to piss off the CPD, which he did. And so, convicted there, he's going to be found liable for the civil damages of the excess costs that they incurred, something like 3,000 man hours to investigate the fake crime. But, it was fascinating.
So what was his true motive then? Was he courting controversy to raise his profile? Did he have a psychological disorder?
I'm sure he would, if he were to get diagnosed, he would have a psychological disorder, because this is I believe, clinical narcissism and pathological dishonesty. But one of the working theories is that there's a couple of working theories. Some are more not unsubstantiated, but more called it out there with respect, because I don't think anything is out there anymore. One was that he was unhappy with his working conditions. He wanted a raise. He wanted more notoriety. He wanted more attention on the set of Empire, and he thought this would further his career. Another one is, apparently, I don't know what the official connection is to Kamala Harris. Apparently, he's related to her in some respect, according to some. I have no way of verifying this. And that this was something of a political ploy to try to pass what Kamala Harris wanted to push through, which was by way of anti-lynching legislation in the States. Because immediately after it happened, Kamala Harris, I think Cory Booker as well, came out and said, this is a modern day lynching and we want to pass legislation to respond to this. So some people think this might have been political. This might have been to start a race war. This might have been to harm Donald Trump politically. And others just say he was, a narcissist looking for more attention, and playing victim, even if you have to make yourself the victim through dishonest means, is a way of getting points, so to speak.
Well, it made him one of the most famous people in the Western world, so perhaps he did achieve one of his objectives. What's happened with his career since all this?
I think his career is effectively dead. He was directing a movie recently that before the trial. I don't know what impact this is going to have, but the funny thing is, I made a video a while back that, he could still be forgiven if he just owned up for it. And the funny thing is, it's a phenomenon. The deeper you dig the hole, the more digging out you have to do. And when it comes to apologizing, you have to rebuild your integrity. And the more you've compromised your integrity, the longer it takes to rebuild. So I think everybody deserves a chance at redemption and forgiveness, but the harder they have screwed over themselves and lied to other people, the longer it's going to take. So he'll have to go through a serious life transformation for full redemption, but I don't know who's going to touch him with a 10-foot pole after this. Maybe CNN. They might make him an anchor person.
So what's your take on Baldwin? Then that case has gone in an unusual direction.
I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with this. This is another.
Let's run it down with the basics first.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with this. Alec Baldwin was shooting a movie called Rust. It's a low budget Western. I think the budget was $5 million, maybe, which is very low budget for Alec Baldwin. A low budget Western, and we're all just. I remember where I was. I was in West Virginia in Harper's Ferry when I read the news. Alec Baldwin accidentally, prop gun goes off and kills the cinematographer, director of photography. I think they're interchangeable, and shoots the director and goes through and shoots the director in the shoulder. At the beginning, the news was reporting it as misfiring. What did it say? Misfire, accidental discharge, goes off. They're referring to it as a prop gun. And for your viewers who may be watching, it was new to me, and I'm relatively in it. Prop guns are real guns. They call them prop guns because they belong to the property department of a film set, but they're real functional firearms. So when the news breaks, prop gun goes off and accidentally kills a director of photography, it's like, okay, benefit of the doubt. I didn't even know that prop guns were real. The more this story evolved, the more guilty Alec Baldwin made himself look. Because it turns out it was a real firearm. It turns out he was holding it and pointing it at a person, and it contained a live ammunition. It turns out it wasn't a misfire. It wasn't a casing. It wasn't like what happened to Bruce Lee. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't Bruce Lee. It was his son,
Brandon Lee.
It wasn't what happened to Brandon Lee, which was like, in fact, a 1 in a trillion accident where there was apparently some casing left in from a previous discharge, and it was a live bullet. How it got there is the question. But Alec Baldwin, after the incident, first of all, goes out and starts tweeting things like the day or 2 days later, which is a mistake. Then he starts giving like roadside interviews, yapping left, right, and center. Then he goes out and gives an interview with George Stephanopoulos, prime time. I forget what network. But when he does the roadside interview, which he already should not have done, and says, I can't discuss this. I have been instructed by the investigators to not talk about this. It is under investigation. Then goes on to talk about it, but then goes on to do a primetime interview with George Stephanopoulos, like, a half an hour show where he goes into detail and explains what he says happened, which is they were rehearsing. The director of photographer says, pose for me for the scene. And then allegedly, tells him to pull the hammer back, for getting the shot. He pulls it back, says, can you see this? Can you see this? And then it goes off in his hands. And goes, what happens. But his explanation in the interview with George made no sense. You got all these gun experts on the interwebs giving an analysis as to how his explanation is, unless the firearm was modified or broken or whatever, is physically impossible based on the type of prop gun that they were using. The story didn't make any sense. He said that after it went off, he didn't know what Helena Hutchins goes down and he doesn't know what happened. He's wondering if she fainted, as if you wouldn't immediately know what happened based on the type of trauma this type of shot would leave. It's a .45 caliber slug. And it also struck the director in the shoulder as well. So his story didn't make any sense. He kept on talking, and I think in a way needled the district attorney or whatever the investigators in the same way Jussie Smollett did. And the other day, they just served a search warrant on Alec Baldwin for his cell phone. And my goodness, I hope he didn't say anything that is contradicted by what's in his cell phone, because that would not look so good for the investigators. But the $1 million question is, how did the live ammunition get in there? But even if that were the $1 million question, the slightly lesser but equally as important question is, why would Alec Baldwin pull the trigger? Did he pull the trigger? Is this a miraculous accidental discharge? Even if it were, why is he pointing what he knows to be a real gun at anybody? So lots of questions, but I predicted it early that he's going to face charges, and the more he talks, the more he increases those odds, and the more he basically thumbs his nose at the investigators by opening his big yap publicly. But that's that's the one that's.
Most people know to plead the fifth, and for him to blab like that, do you think that is from an invincibility complex, naivety, or poor legal counsel?
I do not think it's poor legal counsel. I think his attorneys are probably punching their computer screens when they see this happening. I think it's might be considered narcissism. I think this guy expects everyone to believe every word he says. And on the flip side, I do think it's genuine. He doth protest too much, because I think my theory is that he got frustrated on the set, pulled the trigger in haste just to release the hammer, and didn't know that there was a live round in there, obviously. So I think he did something negligent, but I think he feels so guilty that the only way to ease his soul is to just publicly affirm how innocent he is, which is an indication of some form of culpability. And he's also a raging narcissist, and he expects everyone to believe him. And the more people don't believe him, the more he has to go out there and protest as to how innocent he truly is. But his explanations were, they're pathological from a behavioral perspective. If you see these traits in people, you want to avoid them. But everything is always someone else's fault. It was the armorer who left rounds on there. It was the set who was disgruntled. It was the director of photography herself who told him to point the firearm at her. It was everybody on earth, and he did nothing and bears no responsibility, and even said as much in his interview with George Stephanopoulos. So but it's a classic example. Jussie Smollett as well. Keep quiet, and you increase the likelihood of not making a mistake. Open your mouth. those odds change radically and quickly.
Got a question from one of the viewers. I'll put it on the screen. What do you think of Baldwin saying he didn't pull the trigger?
So there are two, and I'm not a firearm expert by any means. I did take a 2-day course, so I know more than I let on. There are two theories on this. This was apparently a single action revolver, Pieta, basically a Colt long arm, something along those lines. I might have gotten it wrong. Apparently it's a double action, so you can pull the trigger, the hammer, halfway back. That's called half cocked, and then it locks in place. But even if it doesn't lock in place and hits the firing pin from there, doesn't have enough energy to discharge. When it's full cocked all the way back, the only way to release the hammer is to pull the trigger. And that's where he either did pull the trigger, or what some people are hypothesizing is his finger was always depressed on the trigger just because he's holding the gun negligently, because he maybe doesn't know enough about firearms. So he's always depressing the trigger. And when he pulls the hammer all the way back, it never locks at full cock. And when you release the hammer from the back, then it can release and hit the firing pin with sufficient force to trigger a discharge. So two theories are he was always depressing the trigger. And so when he full cocked it, it never locked, and it could have swung back the hammer and hit it. My theory, and I did a great, it was one of my videos that I'm proud of. I think he pulled the trigger on purpose because he was frustrated. He thought, at worst, I'll discharge a blank and I'll scare this director of photography who's irritating me. But when I pieced together all of the bits of the interviews, you have Alec Baldwin saying he doesn't like traveling to do movies. He likes to be with his family. The way he described Helena Hutchins in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, it didn't sound like he liked her at all. In his first roadside interview, he said, she was my friend. She was my friend. And then in his George Stephanopoulos interview, it turns out that he only met her for the first time on set and had dinner with her. From the industry, directors of photography are not really supposed to be giving instructions to the lead actor, producer, A-list actors like Baldwin. And the way he's describing it is the day of the incident. She's telling him what to do with the gun, and he says, can you see this? Can you see this? Can you see this? And then it goes off. That's his explanation. And I was listening to this replay in my head in the middle of the night. I was like, oh, he said it so calmly and patiently. Can you see this? Can you see this? But if he were pissed off and he's like, this person doesn't leave me alone. I'm away from my family on a low budget set of a Western movie. I did a movie with freaking Meryl Streep and Anthony Hopkins, and now I'm doing this. And someone's telling me what to do. It's like, and then I heard it like, can you see this? Can you see this? And then, he just either lets the hammer go or pulls the trigger to get the hammer out of full cock, thinking at worst it'll be a discharge of a blank. Then a real discharge occurs, and he's sitting there saying, "Who the hell put a live round in this gun? Because I would never have pulled the trigger had I even thought this was possible." So that's my theory. Sticking with it, and the more he talks, the more I think he's getting charged with something.
Are there any witness accounts? Who else was present?
Good question. So that's another good question. Is the only well, I think from what we understand, there was the assistant director David Halls was present, Helena Hutchins was present, and Joel Souza, the director, was present, and Alec Baldwin. I don't know if anyone else was there. According to the search warrant, the armorer says that access to the scene was limited because of COVID restrictions, if you can believe that. So those are the 4 people who were present, from what I understand. A lot of people are saying it's inconceivable that there was no video of this. It's inconceivable no one was recording or taking pictures. But the 2 people who were present are not talking all that much, and Joel Souza is not saying a darn thing. And there is a theory that the reason why Joel Souza is keeping his mouth shut is because he could be on the hook. If there was negligent discharge or negligent whatever, producers, the person who did it, directors could all be on the hook. So he might be being wise and keeping his mouth closed until anything happens to him. And he might also be keeping his mouth closed until it's time to thoroughly throw Baldwin under the bus to exonerate himself, which is another one of my working theories. I think Souza knows exactly what Baldwin did, and he's waiting for charges to be pressed. If he gets swept up in them, he's going to throw Baldwin under the bus and say, this guy went nuts, he lost his temper, pulled the trigger, not thinking there was a live round in there.
You got a question coming from Crazy Jane. Why were there live bullets anywhere on the set?
I am not repeating my own knowledge on this because I have no experience with it, but if you watch Eric Hunley and Mark Robert on America's Untold Stories, Robert has ample experience with Hollywood. First of all, they're in the middle of the desert. They might be, it's a real gun. Why not have some fun learning how to use it, target practice in the range, which Baldwin said they were doing. But my understanding is that it happens more often than not, but in this case, live rounds were there for whatever the reason. Rumors are that they were using the gun for actual target practice, which is how the live rounds might have been even left in the gun in the first place. But from what I understand, it's not unheard of or even rare that there are live rounds on set. But typically, there's excess safety protocol on set, which might have been compromised because of the COVID restrictions.
Yeah, this question came in, but I think you just answered it. Why wasn't the gun loaded with blanks?
So, and there's very interesting things. There's different types of blanks. There are some that are dummy rounds, which contain a discharge, but not enough for full propulsion of the projectile. They look real. If the gun is not loaded, it's interesting. For the scene, you'll see it, and it won't look realistic. But what's very interesting is that they had a box of 50 rounds of what were supposed to be blanks, and apparently there were upwards of 7 live rounds in the box of 50. So it could have been a negligent error from the prop company right up to on-set conduct. Bottom line, Alec Baldwin says, I didn't check the gun when they gave it to me. They said it was cold, therefore I thought it was cold, and when it went off, we were all stunned. But if he thinks it's a cold gun, it could explain some of his what's the word I'm looking for? Rash behavior. If he says, oh, it's a cold gun, and this woman's pissing me off, I'm just gonna pull the trigger back out of frustration. Worst that happens, blank goes off, and everyone learns a lesson to treat me with some respect. That's my working theory.
Just a final question then before we run out of time. If he does get indicted, what's the maximum charges and prospective sentence he could be facing?
So I don't know. I mean, people are floating negligent homicide. People are floating a number of charges. I would have no idea what the specific charges in. I think we're Albuquerque. We're in New Mexico. So I don't know what the charges could be, but I mean, anywhere from involuntary manslaughter to negligent, reckless homicide. I mean, I don't know what the charges would be. Deliberate murder would be something of an overcharge, but could be. I don't know what the rules are on felony murder in New Mexico. But if it's like other states, it could be felony murder, where in committing a felony that leads to death, you could get felony murder. I don't even know if they have that there, but charges are wide open. But like, if I'm going by Canadian standards, you can have reckless discharge of a firearm, reckless conduct leading to death, a number of charges. Serious stuff.
Well, huge thank you for coming on, man. You are such an eloquent speaker, and you're so upbeat as well. Your energy level is really uplifting.
Despite what the Canadian government is doing to us, you have two alternatives in life: smile or cry. And every now and or I could say smile or scowl. And every now and again I scowl, but yeah, it's you have to laugh at the absurdities, otherwise it gets to be too overwhelming.
We'll have all your links below the description box, but do you just want to verbally let people know where they can find you and support you?
On YouTube is Viva Frei. On Locals, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which is the dedicated law stuff with the world-renowned Robert Barnes. That is where you should go if you want to support in any meaningful way. But YouTube is where the videos are at, on Rumble. And the Angry Viva is on Twitter, and that is called the Viva Frei. Because some Russian guy has Viva Frei for some reason, and I asked for it years ago, but the Viva Frei on Twitter, and everywhere else it's just Viva Frei.
Oh, well, thanks very much. And hopefully we can do a collaboration in 2022. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and may we have a better 2022 than 2021.
Indeed. Happy Christmas. Take care, my friend. Cheers.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.